Good to go now. So what we're going to do is essentially show you what our cluster is made of. I'm going to run a kubectl, get nodes to show you that I am running on AKS. All right, so I have 3 nodes, as you can see in the agent pool listed. I did run a older version 1.26. You can run version 1.28 on Kubernetes now, hosted inside Azure, but it's in preview. So I wanted to go with something a little bit older in that regard. So as far as installing Threat Mapper, it can be a little confusing with the documentation. A couple issues I ran into specifically will relate more to the storage classes, right? So if you do kubectl get storage classes, you can see essentially on the back end what those persistent volume claims are specifically for your cloud service provider. So right now listed inside Defense's documentation, it has Google Cloud Platform and AWS. So as far as Azure is concerned, I went with default for this specifically. You likely could run managed CSI or managed for this, but I went with default and it was ready to go. So if you see the wait for customer, essentially it's waiting for, or wait for consumer essentially for you to utilize that, right? So let me run a clear and show you what this is essentially made of. So if I do a kubectl get pods, let's do an all statement. We can see that we have quite a lot running throughout our platform, right? So if you can see, Defense will be deployed. Typically, the management console will go first, and then the sensor agent is essentially what's sending the signals back to your console. So think of the sensor as what is needed on the endpoint, right? When we're thinking agent-based as far as that. So you can see we have quite a lot of pods going on here, but specifically for Defense, it's consuming a good portion. So you don't want a small cluster for this. That's why I did 3 nodes specifically. Obviously, you want to keep cost in mind. So now, if we do a kubectl get services, right, we're going to look specifically defense console. If I do the defense console, as you can see, I have a few items here. I have defense, Neo4j, Postgres, Redis, right? But we see our router, and this is how you use external access. It's going to present it as a load balancer for that object, and then it's going to give us an IP address. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this. I'll open up Chrome. And what we're going to do is go to that specific link in the background, and I'm going to show you what that portal breaks down to. Okay, so let me just move out of this specifically, open up a new tab, and I will share out that. Okay, so you should be seeing what it looks like as far as inside Chrome right now, right? So in the background, you see I have a tab for my AKS cluster, and then you'll get this warning, right, that it's not private because we haven't turned on the TLS for this specifically. I'll go over that in another video, but just to show you how Defense essentially looks. So as you can see, that load balancer that is shown to the external public, right, will give us that IP address up here, and then it gives you a lock API key. So this is very important in that regard. The API key is essentially what is needed for the last part of the Helm chart, so you definitely want to make sure you're doing that. So or that you at least keep that somewhere hidden. So what are we seeing here? So as far as Defense itself, it's going to look pretty much more, they've redone essentially the user interface. You have essentially your topology, and up here, a high-level summary of your inventory, right? So cloud being Azure as far as that, and then the host that the sensor sits on. I did only put one cluster in here. You can have multiple clusters regardless where they reside. 57 pods and 73 containers along with namespaces, and then it even has your images, right? So if you can just see, this kind of breaks down from the summary, specifically what's going on in your cluster, right? Mind you, I deployed this back and forth, so I've been kind of just testing it. So if it looks a little bare bones, that's why. But as you can see, for Kubernetes, I have a compliance score down here, annotated 49.5, and we'll get into what that breaks down to. If you had attack paths that are found, this would show up here for an attack path specifically. So the really cool thing about this is the topology, which essentially is using graph visualization. So if you can see, this will show you where your cloud platform sits, where the internet, the inbound, right, and then what is it connected for the outbound specifically. So if I click my little logo here, right, you can see what region I'm placed in. So I placed my cluster in the West US region. We can see our cluster here that has that sensor, and then we can expand that out, right? So let me manipulate this. So that cluster specifically will break down into the agent pools that we saw earlier when I did a kubectl get nodes, right, that you're seeing. And then I named this prod cluster when I deployed it, so that's why it's annotated a little different right there. But let's say we want to expand some details on that specifically. You can see you can keep manipulating it to see further insights into what is actually deployed on those nodes. So it's getting a little out of hand. Let me zoom out a little bit just so you can see that. So you can see all the connections, all the central details of that specific pod, right? I can get image details, when's the last tag with it, what's it created, essentially. For monitoring, I can look for if it has a vulnerability scan, any processes running with it. It's very intuitive. So I can do start vulnerability scan, start malware scan, right, etc. So very, at least from my experience last time, they've cleaned this up where the icons are a lot more clear to specifically what it's doing, but also the user interface design is just seamless. So you can see here I can kind of drag and drop as needed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my cluster. I'm going to go back, expand that, and I'm going to run a scan on my specific host, but I'm just going to see how that actually interacts. So let me run. So this is showing specifically where defense is at. And if you can see, I have Defender for containers, Defender for cloud essentially mapped to this as well. So I can show you what that looks like on our end. This is just on top of that, another area of visibility you can use from that specifically, right? So this is going to tell me everything associated with that cluster. Now, if you hit location, it's likely just going to expand to know that, hey, you're just deployed in this region. Because of that, obviously, if I had any type of data flows that I don't want in that specific region, i.e. databases, things like that, to be aware of where your resources are deployed. So if you can see, this tells you what is from inbound, and then if you had traffic going outbound, what's that mapped to specifically, right? So you can see how it highlights it for you, makes it really simple. You can also do graph view up here. You can do a table view if that makes it a little easier for you. It might not be as intuitive in that regard, right? Now again, so let's say you wanted to scan the agent pool. I can do, let's do a start vulnerability scan. I can look for OSs, .NET, right? I can go for quite a lot. So I will do a scan on that. I will do a secret scan as well to see if there's any secrets, and I'll do a malware scan and a posture scan. So for posture, the great thing about this is it breaks down from a category standpoint, essentially HIPAA, PCI DSS, NIST, and in another area, it also has some of the NSA checklists. So if you follow hardening frameworks, NSA has made a framework for Kubernetes that you can essentially have applied to your clusters as well. So it's a really good way to understand your best practices if you're following along with those, right? So let's just do, for this, let's say I'm just concerned about NIST. Let's disable the PCI, disable that. Let's start a scan. So once that scan's done, it will give us some information. And if you can see, right, this will break down specifically West US, more information about our CIDR range, our private IP, etc. So when I go back to threat graph, right, this will show you essentially what threats exist. Now, if you can see the host one, this will tell you the pool itself, right? This will essentially tell you any threats associated with this should be populated. But think about that as far as mapping specifically from a visual standpoint, what threats you do have out there. Now, as far as vulnerability, since we just started that scan, it's probably going to take some time. I'll click a refresh and we can view that at a later time frame. But if you can see, this really maps it out at a high level with also really nice color coding here. So you have critical, high, medium, and low. And then as far as secrets as well, kind of similar in that same fashion, right? So if I go to view, as you can see in the background, that scan's already kicked off, and then it will break down those categories of what its findings are. And then so for malware, right? It looks like we do have some malware that we might need to look into here. So let me see. View all scans. Okay, perhaps that's pre-populated because it won't let me click on that. So let me mess around with this. Okay, posture. So let's cover what posture is. So posture is essentially what you want to assign to your cloud environments as a whole or to the actual host, right? So you have Linux and Kubernetes here. We'll cover each cloud as well to show you kind of what that looks like for the compliance, right? So when you think about accounts, think about your global admin or the accounts associated with your resources in the cloud, right? So for the Kubernetes scan, let me click here. So I ran a compliance scan on this earlier, and this will show you specifically what has passed and then what are essentially alarms. So I'm essentially half-half, okay? No judgment. This was a NSA scan, as you can see, NSA CISA. So let's say we want to click on that and get some more info. If you see, it gives you a pop-out, really nice view. This will tell you specifically containers and daemon should not have privilege access, test rationale, defender, low-level collector, not privileged container, etc. Right, so this will tell you if it's false, if anything is associated, but essentially why that is an issue, and then the rationale behind that as well, right? So if I go a little bit further on the status portion here, I can look at specifically, I want to say it's page 20. Let me filter status. Let's do alarm. So let's check out for the alarms, right? So if I do control daemon set controller privilege disabled, I can click on this, and then we can get actual context from that specifically. Now, mind you, if you can see, it doesn't give you a severity for this. I'm unsure why. At the point in time, I think it categorizes it for alarm first to kind of more informational of what it found specifically. And then if you see up here, it's even got some more advanced features, like if there was a remediation, if there's an Ansible script, a Bash script, or a Puppet script as far as that, and then when's the last time it was updated. So you can go through here and essentially, update it as needed, right? Perhaps you want to notify it, mask it, things of that nature, or you want to send this out to your security team, right? You could do like a grouping of this as well. And then I can hit notify, right? Now, when we notify specifically, the notifications are really intuitive for the integrations piece. So you can see here, I can generate a report. I can send this out to AWS Security Hub, Google Chronicle, at HTTP endpoint. So this could be like a logic app in Azure, right? I could do it to Teams or just a random email as well, or I can send it to S3. As far as the areas to look forward here, let me go back. Okay, so it looks like we're getting some more graphs here. So if you can see our top attack path, so it looks like it did capture an attack path, and we'll dive into what that looks like. But with data specifically, you can start seeing that populated, how that kind of looks, right? So pretty powerful tool. Now, if I hit integrations, I can also create a new report. Now you can see I can do this also by like vulnerability. I can do a container. I can do high, medium, low, and then a duration of that, right? Along with any advanced filter that I want. So really, really nice. I'm really impressed with how far this stuff has come. Now, if I go to malware, right, it looks like that scan has completed. So it looks like we have some stuff to take a look at. So let's take a look. So I see a rootkit, specifically syswrite, dance, match ruled, author is exposed. So this breaks it down, right? High, medium, low, and then if anything was critical. So let's take a look at this one. Strings to match, severity, 0. So it looks like it found a couple findings in the author match rule. Found author is from, okay, so it has a little reference to it. SHA-1 constraints, MD5 constraints. File has a room match that is a crypto signature. Look for MD5. The match rule is okay. Is crypto. Look for MD5 constraints. Strings to match specifically. So it looks like it found something, but it didn't grade that on the severity per se. For some crypto, so it's looking like it's okay, and some more MD5 constraints. So I'm going to have to take a look at some of this noise and go a little bit further with that. But let's go back to threat graph. And let's click here. So we can see our secrets, our posture, right? Let's click posture. This will open up a new screen. Now it's going to tell us the posture of that specific scan, right? So this will tell you what's passed and what's worn, right, from an audit perspective. This will, since we're looking at NIST, right, this will tell us what specifically in NIST is violated, right? So installation script, install audit add W flag, looks like, or VV flag. Okay, Docker to audit rules, then restart the audit daemon using command line. So it wants to find that there is some auditing enabled on that regard. And then a Docker daemon configuration, you should run Docker daemon using Docker no new privileges, so something that likely was not hitting the Linux security module as a preventative measure. And then we have some that pass in that realm too. So really, really intuitive as far as you can see. That was really quick to do a scan, and as you can see, excuse me, on my other nodes here, scan, no scan yet. So let me go back to our attack paths as well. We'll go to threat graph. We'll take a look at our vulnerabilities now. And this should give us some more information as far as how those vulnerabilities are broken down. So think of your vulnerabilities as CVEs that are known. Typically, these are mapped to some type of dashboard. So the top attack paths will tell you, okay, from the internet, these are the ports that we found, these are the CVEs associated, and what's the vector, right? So if you can see, I have quite some things I need to take a look at. So app armor, specifically as far as the package, looks like all are accidentally widened and when compiled, and all versions of app armor. So let me click on a couple of these. I look like I have some outside ones too. So you can see the nice dashboard will give you URLs, the node ID, and then what's the actual CVE of it, exploit proof of concept, right, or CVE type, CVE caused by package path, and then it will even give you a list, or essentially I can click this and this will redirect to typically a site with the information as provided, right? So quite a lot, as you can see, has lit up just from that one scan, right? Now, obviously, I'd have to go through this, look at specifically what is, you want to cross-reference this from like KEVs, right? Known exploited vulnerabilities as well, and you want to ensure that you're capturing specifically what is going on with that, right? So you can mask vulnerabilities, you can notify, unmask them, right? Perhaps you don't agree with it, or you've looked further into it and it doesn't apply, right? Things of that nature. But to be aware of, I mean, you can also download this as a report if you can see up here. Downloads in progress, takes some time. You can always find it in integration reports. And then this will be essentially an Excel file. So let me see if I can open up that Excel file. We can even take a look at that. Or I'll have that in the background. So outside of that, for our secrets, right, we likely want to know what secrets are exposed in that realm. So let's go to view all scans. If I hit the scan that we actually kicked off earlier, so we can see the top 5 secrets as far as severity, high, medium, low. So we can see what those are, signatures to match. So you can see some of this is looking for specific regex patterns, right? So it looks like an AWS session token was found, which is fairly odd, given that we're running this in Azure specifically. So I'm wondering if some of the configuration items from that WA agent have a vulnerability found with it. Okay. And looking at user shared doc bin utils copy your signature to match. So this shows you some of the regex pattern it's looking for, right? Match content, CVS, okay. Red Hat for that specific source, okay. So this will tell you any of your secrets that are exposed, right? And obviously secrets you want to keep fully encrypted in the backend of what's that storage being etcd for that specifically. So really neat tool in that regard because you definitely want to be aware of that. When we're looking at the Linux host, right, so think about this, the underlying backend of Kubernetes are essentially virtual machines, right? Now, obviously we put containers for our node pool, our containers that are then packaged to orchestrate, or we use Kubernetes, but the underlying image that is essentially hosting the OSs, right, or the cluster per se, the node pool, is machines, right? So you also want to make sure you have that a part of your scans too, right? And so not just your images, not just your secrets, the underlying OS that's hosting your applications as well, right? So if you can see now, this will show you just quickly at a high level what are the top CVs, what are the top ports that are open, right, in that regard on that specific node. So when I go back to dashboard, we have a pretty neat dashboard that's already updated here, the amount of containers that we do have. And then as far as the runtime protection, so that's a part of their enterprise solution. So if you wanted the runtime protection, Defense will have what is known as Threat Striker for that specifically. So you can go a little bit deeper into their SaaS application for that, right? So they're a really great tool to have. Even if you are using a different CNAP, right, like Palo Alto, Prisma, things like that, fairly straightforward to get up and running. And then once you're up and running, you can essentially add the sensor as needed to other clouds and things of that nature. So really neat tool. I just wanted to go over specifically some of the updates that they've published in that regard. If you can see up here, you can even change the refresh rate. There's a lot more as far as if you can even see straightforward as far as if I wanted that AWS Security Hub, I can add in, right? It's going to use an access key, region, etc., an account. So you can kind of get these fed into there as well. So really intuitive design from the organization defense, and just wanted to show you the power of this system, and then kind of some of the underlying components that power that as well.